Welcome, this is Aussie Wristwatch. I'm Jessica, and today we are going to delve into Hublot or not to Hublot. Look, if you've been watching this channel, you know that I love watches, but I've really been on a journey in terms of understanding not only literal movements in a watch and what makes them so special, but different brands, history, how they've come about. And of course, one of the things I've discovered, which is not new to most, but it is to me, is the controversy or divisiveness, I should say, in respect to Hublot. And having been on a little trip recently, I got hands-on with some of them, so I wanted to talk about that in a little bit more detail. So let's roll the intro and get started, shall we? All right, so before we get started, please do me a favor, hit the like button or the thumbs up, whatever you want to call it. That thing actually helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Apparently doing shorts also does, so at some point I'll have to get on that boat. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and let's talk Hublot. So, let's do a little bit of history because you guys know that I love that. So I want to talk a little bit about the story of Hublot because I think that's going to help inform what's going on with this brand and where this divisiveness comes from potentially. And then I'll give you my thoughts on a recent experience in the store and a couple of watches I tried on and whether or not I'd buy an Hublot. For what it's worth, of course. So in the late 1970s, a young Italian called Carlo Crocco left his family business, Binder Group, which were best known for making Brill watches, and he launched a new luxury watch brand. I mean, I kind of like that enterprising kind of ideal. It appeals to the entrepreneur in me. So Carlo relocated to Switzerland and he set up MDM Genève and got busy making a watch. It would soon be known as Hublot, which comes from the French word porthole, which, you know, because you guys know my language skills are really wanting, used to me. But interestingly, notwithstanding that Hublot takes its inspiration from portholes, it's not the only watch that does, or in fact, there's a couple of really big ones that took inspiration well before Hublot did, and that in particular is the Patek Philippe Nautilus reference 3700, which I love, by the way, and probably will never have in my collection unless I become a millionaire entrepreneur because it's too expensive, and the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Jumbo reference 5042 ST. Again, I really like that watch, but the Patek is if we're talking about those two, is probably my favorite. Now, they're very classic looking watches and they do take their inspiration from a porthole. So there's been a little bit of conjecture around, you know, Hublot taking inspiration and the lack of originality, I guess. But we'll come to that in a little bit more detail. So whilst the design of the dial wasn't earth-shattering per se, given what I've just said about those other watches, Carlo loved sailing. And so that's why he created this watch. But that's not what made this watch special. What made this watch special is it was built for water, and in particular, he created a rubber strap, which was way more functional than a classic sort of steel bracelet for water sports activities. So, you can say to an extent Carlo was a little ingenious in his own way. He was kind of the first person to pair a precious metal, like a gold for example, with the rubber strap. And you know, rubber straps weren't really seen on expensive watches at that time. In fact, they were generally seen on cheap quartz watches. So I guess that kind of lends into the debate about affordability, but we'll get to that in a minute, right? So in 1980, he unveiled the Hublot timepiece at the Basel Fair, and it kind of got like a lukewarm or lackluster response to it. However, there was a growing luxury sport watch market, which kind of embraced the watch, and it kind of took off from there. So moderate sales kind of ensured for that decade until, and this is something I'm learning, and I'm still going to delve into this guy, but Jean-Claude Biver, he steps in as CEO in 2004. So Hublot's been going for quite some time at this point, and just kind of like, you know, trotting along, not really setting the world on fire, but not crashing and burning, right? And so people have called Jean-Claude a watch marketing genius. Now, the reason for this is twofold. In the 80s, he revitalized Blancpain following the quartz crisis. Yep, I got to do a video on the quartz crisis, I know, because I kind of have a vague understanding of what it was, but I want to delve into it a little bit more. Now, Blancpain was sold to Swatch Group in 92 for 60 million, I think, Swiss francs, which 92, still today it's a lot of money, but back then even more. Then he moved to Omega, and he left that a decade later having tripled sales. So in my limited sales experience in my corporate life, that's pretty extraordinary stats for a CEO or any kind of sales manager, really. So kudos to Jean-Claude. So he steps in 2004 to Hublot, and what does he do? Well, he introduced the flagship model, which is the Hublot Big Bang chronograph, and the design, they say, was borrowed from the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak offshore chronograph, quickly being called out for its lack of originality. But it seems to me that a lot of people who buy that watch don't give a shit. So we'll get into that in a bit more detail. But, you know, I think the last laugh still is for Hublot, because it's a very popular watch and the sales speak for themselves in that regard. Now, there's some consequences to these watches and Hublot, and some people say they're for the nouveau riche. You know, for example, individuals with a lot of money who tend to do a lot of peacocking, or, you know, what I mean by that is they're flashy, they want to show off, they want to demonstrate their wealth. Perhaps. I mean, I don't know whether that's entirely a fair comment, because if you're watching this, you love watches, right? And so you understand that there's a lot of, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of boutique watches that are a lot more affordable, but even then they're pretty expensive. But then if we're talking about a Rolex, let's take good old Rolex, because you guys know I can't go a video without at least mentioning them once. I'm not a Rolex hater. In fact, I'm a Rolex fangirl. I don't have one. Now, that's for obvious reasons, and I'm not going to go into that now. But that's not to say I wouldn't like to have one in the collection, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But it is an expensive watch for what it is. So is a Panerai, so is an IWC, all of these things, right? So if you're wearing these watches, I don't know, like, I know you're wearing them because you love them, and that's why I wear a watch. But to say that you simply wear an Hublot, which is because it's expensive to flaunt your wealth, I'm not too sure whether that's entirely fair. Maybe just a little hint of truth to it. So the other thing that Jean-Claude did with Hublot is he created, possibly to the joke now of the watch community, exclusive models. And then the joke seems to be, from my research, that there's so many exclusive models now, he's kind of watered down the exclusivity of them, meaning every man and his dog who's got some kind of stature out there seems to have an exclusive model for him. Sporting people, influencers, adventurists, musicians, everything, you name it, there seems to be a watch to suit everybody's needs, which is probably part of their appeal in terms of covering the field. Tag's kind of done that to their detriment, perhaps, just in terms of the messiness of their marketing, but doesn't mean there aren't some great watches within the collections. All right, so let's talk about the watch itself. And I thought it might be easier if I talked generally about a specific watch. And because I got up close and personal with 3 watches on my US trip, one of which I really did like. Well, actually, I liked them all. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I'll talk about whether I would or wouldn't buy them in a minute, but just purely on aesthetics, how they looked on, how they felt, I quite enjoyed putting them on. Sacrilege! But I'm just being honest with you. So, I was in Arizona, I was in Scottsdale. It was great, by the way, for those of you who haven't missed it. I probably won't stop banging on about it or rabbiting on for a while, but it was my first trip there. It was exceptionally hot. Of course, it's the desert. And I found myself one afternoon after I'd been for a bit of Topgolf solo. My wife was at a conference, so I have to entertain myself for a few days, which it's not hard to do for me. So I played Topgolf, and then I'm like, what am I going to do? So I wandered off to, I think it was called Fashion Square down in Scottsdale, huge mall, and just wandered around and found myself wandering into a couple of watch boutiques, one of which was Hublot. I was met, and I feel really awful because I can't remember the AD's name, but I was met with this lovely guy who got up, took a look at my wrist, of course, as they always do. I was actually wearing my Panzera Motorsport 42, so he didn't know what that was, but he still spoke to me anyway. That's what I love. And we got talking about watches, and he pulled a few out for me to try on. And in particular, I found myself trying on a classic fusion in black magic and a ceramic, I think it was ceramic king gold. I'm going off the photos I took because I'm on holidays. I didn't take notes. I was just kind of going with the flow, but I'm pretty sure those were the 2 classic fusions I put on, and they were nice and they were elegant and a little bit of fun. But then he put the Big Bang Unico titanium 44mm on my wrist with a skeleton dial. Loved it. It's so wrong and so right on so many levels, and we'll talk about that. So let's get into the specs for this watch. So the bezel is satin finish with polished titanium. It's a black structured lined rubber strap, and it's water resistant to 100 meters or 10 ATM. The power reserve is 72 hours, so that's pretty decent. It's the same as my Panerai 422 that I've got on today. There's my wrist check halfway through the video, of course. The size, as I said, was 44mm. It's a sapphire crystal anti-reflective dial, or case, I should say. Dial's matte black skeleton, and the movement, most importantly, because I know you guys want to know this, is the HUB 1280 Unico manufacture. Self-winding chronograph with flyback movement column wheel. This is important, and we'll talk about it shortly. The overall look of this watch, let's talk about that for a moment, because they're unusual, but then they're not. So like for me, Hublot is like Richard Mille, but cheaper, obviously. In that there's a lot going on, people, and that's what this Big Bang is. There's a lot going on, but I kind of liked it. I'm not usually a skeleton dial kind of gal, but this one I enjoyed. The thing that gets me, and it's an irk with a lot of people, not just me. I've seen Adrian from Bark and Jack talk about it. I've seen Jenny L talk about it. I've seen comments online and reviews, and also the screws. Let's talk about the screws, people, because they are not lined up properly on any of the models, on any of the watches, which I think is maybe arguably what they're trying to go for, them being unique in that way. But I've got OCD, so it irritates me. Does it irritate me enough to never buy that watch? I'm not sure, but I think it would get on my nerves a little bit. But I wonder, they're so misaligned, it has to be deliberate, right? Like it can't just be shoddy workmanship, you'd hope. Because you see other screws on watch dials, faces, whatever you want to say, and they're aligned like that. They're all the same. These ones, nah. So that's probably the biggest gripe, aesthetically speaking, and it's a common one. Okay, so let's talk now about the movement. Now this is a really big bone of contention for people when it comes to Hublot, because Hublot watches are statement pieces. Whether you think it's a positive statement or a negative statement about your choice or knowledge of watches, that's a separate issue, but they're a statement piece and they're very expensive as a whole. So this Big Bang is 27,000 Australian. I think it was 18 or 19,000 in the store in America. So for that price, people will argue, and I guess rightly, as you know, because I'm learning about watches and movements are just quite new to me. It's not really been a front of mind concern when I've been going to buy watches. I just buy what I like from an aesthetics point of view, but I'm beginning to understand now the importance of a movement. I know I sound like ditzy watch novice. That's the channel, peeps. So Hublot get a lot of criticism for this because they don't always place in their watches an in-house movement. In fact, some of their very, very expensive watches don't have an in-house movement. So this one does. Okay, so this is 100% in-house. The Unico gives that away. It's the name of their first in-house movement and the name stuck, and that was in 2010. So Hublot acquired property and assets of movement maker BNP Concept. The non-Unico Big Bang has a third party base movement. So if you don't see Unico in, it's most likely going to be a third party non-in-house movement. That is where the contention lies and the divisive nature of this brand, I think, begins and almost ends. That and the fact that they're not 100 years old, but that's a separate issue because, well, Tesla's not 100 years old and people seem to love them for their innovation, but probably not a great comparison, but let's move on. Okay, so like I said, they're expensive, so there's a big deal to them when they're not the in-house movement for that price. And the thing about this watch that's cool though is the complication with the chronograph flyback and skeleton dial. And I think it's that makes me want to have this watch in my collection. So let's talk about my thoughts, shall we? Because that's what we're here for. Okay, so as I've said, this is the thing, right? I'm not a watch snob. At least I don't think I am, in the sense that I'm too novice to pretend that I actually know enough about them to be a legitimate watch snob. So I think I've come to Hublot with fresh eyes, and I'm not going to pretend that they're in the same league. Well, I mean, because they're just not in the same league as a Patek or an AP. I don't care. What, in my personal novice view, that's how I feel. So I don't necessarily think it's fair to compare them like some people do or want to, other than, of course, the aesthetics of them. But yeah, I just want to make that clear. Like, I'm happy to be a watch novice. I'm happy to not be a watch snob. I mean, sure, I've got some expensive watches in my collection, so there must be some kind of discerning element or snobbery to my watch buying. But yeah, and I think we know where Hublot's market sits. This is the important thing. What I mean by that is this. If you're worried about the price of the movement, then Hublot is not for you. I think it's as simple as that, right? If you're worried about the price, and or the movement, it's not for you. Hublot is not the watch for you. You're looking at the wrong watch. And I think you already know that as a watch enthusiast, right? And this is where Hublot gets much of their bad shtick, because this is where it comes back to, well, then Hublot is for the people who want to show off their wealth and flaunt it and be fancy because they don't know a fucking thing about watches. I think that's where we're getting at. Deep down, some people probably just don't want to admit it or catch it in those terms, but I think in essence, is that what we're saying, people? I think it is. And sure, whatever. I mean, I think the people who have that money and are happy to just buy a really fucking expensive watch because they like the way it looks and they think it's cool, and sure, they might think it's gonna make them look good in front of others. Well, that's their call. It totally is their call. Look, but if you're like me, so someone who knows a little bit about watches, well, not much at all, as we've established, but you're simply drawn to the way things look or the way a watch sings to you once it's on your wrist, then maybe Hublot could be a watch for you. Okay, the big bang that I've been talking about, I think, is fun. All right, it's interesting and it looks really epic on, and it's unusual. It's definitely some form of statement piece, and by that I'm not necessarily meaning an ostentatious show-off piece. It's definitely a talking piece. I think if you were wearing that out at a dinner party with friends, people who are not watch snobs, watch enthusiasts, are probably going to look at it and comment, and you might be able to actually have a conversation with them about a watch. But I don't know. Yeah, I think, it comes back to that whole concept of overpriced, gaudy watch. And the whole watch snobbery. And I think I've talked about that enough, but the reality is, I think they're okay. The question is, would I buy one and would I have it in the collection? I think that's what we want to get to, right? I think the answer is this. In short, yes. In long, not yet. I'm not going to spend $27,000, well, probably on any watch, let's be realistic at this point, yet. But I'm certainly not going to spend my 27 grand on that watch first. I think an Hublot for a watch enthusiast such as myself is going to come in the collection later on. I can't choose this watch over, well, let's be frank, any other Panerai that I want, because I'm not done there. But for example, a Rolex, assuming I can somehow get a call one day, I'll be straight in to pick up the subby, no date, a GMT, or even a Daytona. Feel free to call me on any three of those watches. But no, to be serious, the other one is IWC. I love the big Pilot, the Top Gun. I mean, I would choose one of those watches, and like the Mojave's, I think 25,000 from memory. I would choose that over the Hublot, most likely to start with. I would get a Breitling Navitimer, which granted is not $27,000, but I could get two watches for that price that are on my list before I get the Hublot. Do you kind of catch my drift? I'm saying to you guys, I actually like the watch. And I understand the issues around it in terms of in-house versus third-party movements for the price and the price point it's at. I'm not necessarily entirely on the lack of originality train like some people are, and that it's copying AP or Patek. I think, yes, it probably takes inspiration from those watches, but so do so many other watches with other brands, and we don't seem to give them as much shtick. They're also not as expensive as a Hublot, so that might have something to do with that. But to each their own. I think the Big Bang is a watch to have in a collection of someone who's a watch enthusiast at some point in time, for me. I like it. I think it is a little different, a little crazy. It's not something I'd normally get, and I think that's why I've gravitated towards it a bit. Sure, it's a big watch, but it's not just about the size of this watch, it's about what's going on. I'm generally into watches that are more simpler in function or aesthetic. So I think from that point of view, it would be a nice complement to what I've already got. But again, Rolex, Breitling, IWC, they're ahead of the list, my friends. Well ahead of the list of nice to have, want to have watches. Hublot is on the list, but towards the bottom. Yeah, I mean, that's my thoughts on Hublot. I kind of like I said, I wanted to do this video because I wanted to get a better understanding of what on earth is going on with this hatred of Hublot, because people are either in the pro Hublot camp or the con Hublot camp. It's one or the other. I don't see many people sitting on the fence, if at all, particularly online in comments and stuff like that. So, you know, I've seen them in the flesh on people's wrists. They look cool, but I get it. I get either argument, to be honest with you, and I'm not sitting on the fence. I guess I'm in the Hublot camp, but just not gonna rush out and buy one tomorrow. Yep, so that's it. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. I know it's gonna divide us. Hopefully you'll still speak to me after the video ends, given what I've just told you. But that's the whole point, right, of being a watch lover. Sharing your thoughts, ideas, having a robust conversation, and just enjoying them. And that's the whole point. So please hit the like. If you've stayed this long, you've liked it. So please do me a favor and do that. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And keep it coming. Until next time, guys, have a good one.